Michael's chest heaved as his feet pounded the forest floor. He wasn't sure how long he'd been running, but every breath burned. He could hear it again, the heavy steps, the low rumble, the sharp snap of branches breaking in its path. Whatever it was getting closer. His legs screamed for rest, but fear kept them moving. The darkness had swallowed the sky whole, leaving Michael running through a world that never saw the sun. The trees were twisted and gnarled, their shadows stretching long and threatening in the pitch-black forest. Each gasp echoed, each step sounded too loud, and in every pause he could hear the creature stalking him, playing with him. The ground beneath his feet was uneven, treacherous. Rocks, roots, and fallen branches threatened to trip him at every turn, but stopping wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen daylight, or if he'd ever had. Michael didn't dare look back. Looking back meant facing what was chasing him, and he wasn't ready for that. His mind screamed for escape, for some way out of this endless, dark forest, but no matter which direction he ran, the trees closed in. His feet stumbled, and he caught himself on a jagged tree trunk, feeling the rough bark scrape his palms. The forest was a maze, and it was alive. It shifted as he ran, the paths twisting, the trees bending, never letting him find a way out. It was as if the entire forest was in on the hunt. Every sound made his heart leap, each crack of a branch, each rustle of leaves, and it became impossible to tell what was real. He darted between the trees, his breath coming in sharp, desperate bursts. His legs burned, his throat ached, but the fear of whatever hunted him drove him forward. The forest closed in tighter, and with every turn, the shadows seemed to grow thicker, darker, as if the night itself was alive and trying to swallow him whole. Suddenly, a tree root caught his foot, and he stumbled, crashing to the ground. Dirt and leaves filled his mouth as he gasped for breath, scrambling to push himself up. But before he could move, he heard it, a low, guttural growl. Closer now, so close he could feel the vibrations in the ground beneath him. He froze. The growl was followed by the sound of heavy breathing, the rhythmic thud of massive footsteps crushing the undergrowth. Michael didn't need to see it to know it was right behind him. He couldn't move. His body refused to listen, paralyzed by fear. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping, praying that somehow it wouldn't see him, that somehow he'd vanish into the shadows. But the growl deepened, a rumbling sound that filled the air, and he could feel its presence looming over him. The air around him felt heavier, colder, and every instinct in his body screamed that whatever this thing was, it was more than just a wild animal. It was something far worse. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the growl stopped. The forest fell silent again. Michael opened his eyes, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. The creature was gone. Somehow, it had vanished into the darkness once more. He didn't wait. With shaking hands, he pushed himself to his feet, every muscle in his body trembling. He had to keep moving. He had to keep running. The forest around him blurred as he sprinted forward, deeper into the maze of trees. His breaths were shallow, his vision unfocused, but he couldn't stop. Not until he found a way out. Not until he was safe. But as he ran, a sickening realization began to creep over him. He wasn't sure how long he'd been running, or how far he'd gone. The trees all looked the same. The shadows all felt the same. Had he been here before? Was he running in circles? No matter how far he ran, no matter how fast, the forest never changed. The darkness never lifted. He was trapped. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut, stealing his breath. This wasn't just a forest. It was a prison, a nightmare that he couldn't escape. And the creature, whatever it was playing with him, toying with him. Michael's legs gave out again, and he collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. The world around him was spinning, the shadows swirling like a thick fog, suffocating him. He couldn't think straight. He couldn't breathe. Was this how it ended? After all the running, all the fear? Was this the moment it finally caught him? No, he wouldn't let it end like this. With trembling hands, Michael pushed himself up once more. His legs wobbled beneath him, but he forced them to move. One step, then another. He couldn't run anymore, but he could walk. He had to keep moving, even if it felt pointless. He couldn't let the creature win. Not yet. The forest seemed to close in tighter around him with every step. The shadows thickened, and the air grew colder. The creature wasn't far. He could feel it, watching, waiting, biding its time. Michael stumbled through the dark, his heart pounding in his chest. He was losing the fight against exhaustion. His body screamed for rest, but he knew if he stopped, the creature would be on him in an instant. Ahead, something caught his eye, a faint light, barely visible through the trees. It flickered like a dying flame, weak but real. Hope surged through him, and he forced his legs to move faster, ignoring the pain, the fatigue, everything. He pushed his way through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his skin as he scrambled toward the light. It wasn't much, but it was something, a chance, a way out. Michael burst into a small clearing, and there it was, a glowing orb floating in the center of the space, its soft light casting eerie shadows on the trees around it. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, and for a moment, Michael could almost feel warmth coming from it. He staggered forward, his eyes locked on the orb. It was beautiful, hypnotic. Maybe it was his way out. Maybe it was the key to escaping this nightmare. But then, just as his fingers were about to brush the surface of the orb, a sound shattered the stillness. A low growl. Michael froze, his hand hovering just inches from the glowing light. The growl grew louder, more menacing, and he knew it was behind him. The creature had found him. Slowly, Michael turned around, his breath caught in his throat. The shadows in the clearing shifted, coalescing into a massive shape that towered over him. The creature stepped forward, and for the first time, Michael saw it clearly. It was worse than anything he had imagined. Its body was covered in a thick, slimy substance, glistening in the orb's light. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, hunched over with long, sharp claws that gleamed in the dark. But the worst part was its mouth. A grotesque grin that stretched across its face, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, fixed on Michael with a hunger that made his blood run cold. Michael's legs buckled beneath him, and he stumbled backward, his back hitting the orb. The light flickered, and the creature let out a growl, its mouth opening wider, revealing even more teeth. This was it. Michael squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the end. But the blow never came. Instead, there was a flash of light, bright and blinding. The orb pulsed, sending out a wave of energy that rippled through the air. The creature let out a screech of rage, its body flickering like a shadow in the light. It swiped at Michael, but the orb flared again, pushing it back. For a moment, Michael thought he was safe. The creature retreated into the shadows, its form flickering and distorting. But as the light from the orb began to fade, Michael knew it wasn't over. The orb's power was draining, and the creature was only growing more enraged. Michael could hear it, pacing just beyond the edge of the clearing, waiting for the moment the light would die. He couldn't stay here. He had to keep moving. With the last of his strength, Michael pushed himself to his feet and stumbled out of the clearing. The forest swallowed him once more, the darkness closing in around him. The creature's growls echoed through the trees, growing louder with every step he took. He was running again. He would always be running. As the realization sank in, Michael's heart filled with dread. This was his fate. He was trapped in this endless loop, this purgatory, chased by a creature that would never let him go. No matter how far he ran, no matter how many times he escaped, he would always find himself here again, lost in the forest, hunted by the darkness. The chase? It would never end.